Hello, I'm Ben Poor. I'm a senior lecturer in theatre in the Department of Theatre, Film and Television, and I've been asked to say a few words about my use of Padlet. So that's just happened over the last few weeks in the course of the autumn term. Since 2017 I've been involved in a dialogic pedagogy action research project, and in that project students have really appreciated the value of talk. And the feedback that they've given me at the end of the year was that they wanted some way of capturing the talk. So I heard about Padlet at the beginning of this academic year, and this was the function that I had in mind for how I would use Padlet. So here's an example of an early Padlet that I did. So because of this value of talk in seminars, I used it to crowdsource our ground rules for seminar talk in the first of our seminars in week 2. And I used likes as a way of calibrating popular rules, finding the ones that lots of people supported. It was important to me at this point to use the anonymous function so that rules could be suggested without people assigning particular names and faces to those rules. And I added my own commentary or my own gloss where it wasn't immediately clear what the rule meant. So I asked follow-up questions to try and get a bit more detail on that. Then later in the term I was giving a lecture to a third-year option group. Current Trends in Theatre was the name of the module. And I found another use for Padlet, which was that I was gathering ideas at the start of the lecture about what they understood by the term epic theatre. And they were doing this as they were coming in, setting up, and it meant that I had a live document on which to draw, and I was able to give kind of live feedback addressing their baseline understanding of the term. And I could drop in references to the examples and definitions that they'd put on the Padlet as I lectured. So it gave the presentation, gave the lecture more of a live feel, made it feel more interactive because I was addressing their starting points instead of assuming an understanding which they might not have had. As the term went on with my first year introductory lectures, I started to see Padlet being used more to set the agenda for discussions. So if we had a lecture and a screening, several teaching events in the course of a week, and we got to the end of the week and we had quite a few things that we could have discussed, then I would suggest that they put their preferred topics and issues on a talking points Padlet, and to see how popular those were and to see where the real will was in the room to talk about particular things, when actually we could easily have spent a chunk of the seminar talking about any number of things. It helped me to address their specific concerns. Our introductory modules were also focused on the idea of an analytical toolbox for using with plays that we weren't familiar with, different ways of engaging with plays that would allow close reading and analysis. So we used Padlet to build up these toolbox features, and so I would put 1 or 2 suggestions up, and then the students would identify different ways of engaging with the text based on what we had done in the lectures and in the seminars. And I found that it was useful sometimes to have upvoting and downvoting, particularly with things like the talking points Padlets, where you want a sense of where the real force of interest is within the group. And students might not be as willing to come out and say, let's all talk about this, because it feels as if they might be taking charge of the seminar. And students, certainly in my subject, are very self-conscious about that. But with this, they can subtly inflect where the discussion is going, what the agenda for the discussion is, without appearing to be taking charge. And embedding populated Padlets in the VLE I found to be quite a straightforward process. It's a lot less faff than what I did last year, which was photographing squiggles on a whiteboard, hoping that they were still legible and high definition enough, and then posting those images to the VLE. This looks a lot more accessible. And you can scroll up and down and view the various corners of the Padlet if it's larger than a single page, even when it's embedded in the VLE. It's not a static image. And I found that by the end of the first term, my first year students were creating their own Padlets, which were structuring devices so that they could report back on their small group activities and have a visual aid that would help guide them and help guide the rest of the class as to what they were talking about. So here's an example of that. And as is so often the case with students, they're ahead of me in terms of finding out new functionality. So they found that there is a way to introduce grading to the different elements, and as we were looking at a particular play structure and seeing how a given play conformed, how far it conformed to those structural features, they ended up giving it an overall score and grading each element in a very clear way. So that's the story of how I've used Padlet, and my students have developed competences with Padlet over the last 3 months.